Deep in the uncharted wilds of the north lies a place older than memory, and hungrier than legend. The Serpent River Valley, known today as Headless Valley, has swallowed dozens of souls over the past century. Prospectors decapitated. Campfires abandoned. Entire groups vanishing without a trace. Witnesses speak of pale figures among the trees, and of screams echoing down river canyons under a dead, indifferent moon. Some blame the weather. Others whisper of ancient spirits, or something darker, lurking where maps once warned, "Here be monsters." In this episode, we journey into a land so breathtaking, so brutal, that it still refuses to give up its dead, or its secrets. Journey to the north, far north, into the sprawling, untamed heart of what old maps called the vast northern expanse. Here lies a dominion of staggering scale, a territory that could swallow nations whole, yet holds fewer souls than a forgotten village square. It's a land sculpted by ice and time, where mountains claw at the sky and forests stretch like a dark green sea to horizons that never seem to arrive. Winters bite with a fury that can freeze a man's breath in his lungs, the crack of freezing timber echoing like gunshots in the profound cold. Summers are a fleeting, feverish explosion of life stalked by creatures that remember a wilder age. Roads? Few and far between, surrendering quickly to muskeg and unforgiving stone. This is the domain of the bush pilot, the trapper, the hardy few who understand the brutal bargain required to exist here. And nestled within this immensity, like a secret held too tightly, lies a place whispered about in hushed tones around flickering campfires, the Serpent River Valley. 11,000 square miles of pure, unadulterated wilderness. Think sheer cliffs plunging thousands of feet to meet churning, glacier-fed waters, waters so cold they steal your breath on contact. Think forests so dense the sunlight struggles to pierce the canopy, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, trails vanishing underfoot in a bewildering maze of green. The main artery, Swiftwater Creek, is a cruel joke of a name. In stretches, it's less a creek and more a liquid avalanche, capable of splintering boats and swallowing hopes whole in its icy, indifferent grasp. Getting in requires wings, or a boat handled with near superhuman skill, or a trek overland so grueling it breaks spirits as often as ankles. The vastness alone can press in, making a person feel terrifyingly small, utterly insignificant against the backdrop of such raw power. It's breathtaking. Utterly, undeniably magnificent. A glimpse of the planet as it once was, raw and majestic. Eagles soar on unseen currents, moose wade through marshy lowlands, and the silence, oh, the silence is a physical presence, broken only by the wind's sigh through the pines or the distant cry of a wolf. You could lose yourself here, willingly, drunk on the sheer scale and purity of it all. Many have. But there's a catch. Always a catch in places this potent. The beauty feels sharp, edged with something unsettling. Experienced outdoorsmen, people who've spent lifetimes navigating the expanse, speak of the Serpent River Valley with a different kind of respect. A hesitant fear. It's not just the grizzlies lumbering through the undergrowth, or the treacherous terrain ready to trip the unwary, or the sudden, violent shifts in weather that can bring blinding blizzards out of a clear sky. No, it's something else. A feeling. A persistent prickle on the back of the neck, the unnerving sensation of unseen eyes following your movements from the deep shadows between the ancient trees. A pervasive sense of being watched, of trespassing on ground that doesn't welcome human intrusion. They say the valley itself has a memory, and its memories are long, and often dark. The stunning vistas hide a chilling history, one that stretches back further than any written record, carried on the breath of ancient, unsettling legends. And those legends, they run deeper and darker than the valley's own canyons, whispering through the pines on winds that seem to carry voices from a time long past. For millennia, before outsiders ever dreamed of the treasures hidden beneath its soil, the Serpent River Valley was known to the native peoples of the vast northern expanse. Known, and often, feared. It wasn't a place sought out for settlement, not usually. Some tried, drawn perhaps by the rich hunting or the isolation. Few stayed. The stories tell us why. Consider the Denai, the people elders called the Vanished Ones. They were said to have lived deep within the valley, near the shores of a lake that mirrored the sky like polished obsidian. Their village was, by all accounts, thriving. Then, one day, silence. Utter, chilling silence. Neighboring bands, venturing closer after weeks with no smoke rising from the deny hearths, found the camp exactly as if its inhabitants had simply stepped away for a moment. Shelters stood ready, albeit sagging slightly under the weight of recent snow. Stores of dried fish and berries lay untouched. Tools rested where they'd been set down, and adze beside a half-carved canoe, bone needles threaded with sinew tucked into leather pouches. Even children's small toys lay scattered near a fire pit long gone cold. But the people? Gone. Every man, woman, and child. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away into the wilderness, no indication of where they went or why. Just vanished. Overnight. What could make an entire people disappear so completely, leaving the essentials of their lives behind as if plucked from existence itself? The question hangs heavy in the valley air, unanswered through the centuries. Other tribes, those who dared linger on the valley's fringes or pass through its daunting corridors, spoke of different terrors. They spoke of why they eventually fled, abandoning hunting grounds their ancestors might have used. They whispered warnings about the white phantoms, spectral entities glimpsed only at the edge of vision, said to glide between the ancient cedars. Were they spirits? Beings of ice and mist? No one knew for sure, but encounters reportedly left witnesses numb with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature, a soul-deep chill and an overwhelming sense of despair. And then there were the shadow stalkers. Not mere wolves, the stories insisted, though they shared the form. These were larger, possessed of a cunning that felt malevolent, their eyes glowing with a predatory intelligence that unnerved even the bravest hunters. Their howls, echoing through the canyons, didn't sound like any natural beast, they sounded like lament, like hunger, like a promise of inevitable doom. Tribes claimed these creatures didn't just hunt game, they stalked people, driving them mad with fear or simply taking them in the deep, unforgiving night. So the valley remained largely untouched, a void on the mental maps of many indigenous groups. A place known, respected for its harsh beauty, but ultimately shunned. The pervasive feeling of being an unwelcome intruder, the lingering dread fueled by tales of disappearance and monstrous encounters, it was enough to keep most sensible folk away. These were just stories, of course. Folklore. The stuff of nightmares shared around the dying fire. Yet, one has to wonder, were they merely legends born of isolation and the natural fear of the unknown? Or were they fragmented warnings, echoes of a genuine, persistent menace lurking within the Serpent River Valley, waiting patiently for new victims? As the 20th century dawned, bringing with it men driven by a different kind of spirit, the burning lust for gold, that question would begin to find horrifying, tangible answers. Into this valley steeped in unnerving folklore and whispered warnings, strode a new breed of men, blinded not by fear, but by the dazzling promise of gold. The turn of the 20th century saw fortune seekers pushing into ever more remote corners of the vast northern expanse, and the Serpent River Valley, largely untouched, shimmered in their imaginations like a hidden hoard. Among the first to truly test the valley's ominous reputation were the Thorn brothers, Caleb, Silas, and Jonas. Raised tough in the unforgiving northern wilds, they were no strangers to hardship. Caleb, the eldest, was the anchor, steady, pragmatic, his caution born from years reading the subtle language of the land. Silas, younger and restless, burned with ambition, he saw the valley not as a threat, but a challenge, a vault waiting to be cracked open. Jonas, the youngest, was caught somewhere between, loyal to his brothers but perhaps more susceptible to both Silas's enthusiasm and Caleb's quiet warnings. In 1904, fueled by rumors and Silas's persuasive energy, they pooled their meager resources. The prize? Untouched goldfields in the Serpent River Valley. If there was gold, they reasoned, it was theirs for the taking. Their journey in was brutal. Weeks of slogging through dense bush with pack dogs, navigating treacherous ice falls, until they finally reached the headwaters of the infamous Swiftwater Creek. They built a sturdy, if rough, wooden boat, loaded their supplies, and pushed off into the current. The valley swallowed them whole. Towering cliffs pressed in, casting long, cold shadows even at midday. The roar of the water was a constant, deafening companion. Days blurred into a cycle of back-breaking paddling against the current, lining the boat through impassable rapids, and making cold, damp camps on narrow strips of shoreline. Doubt began to creep in. Even Silas fell quiet sometimes, staring up at the impassive stone walls. Then, they found it. In a bend where the creek widened slightly, spilling over gravel bars, Silas dipped his pan and let out a whoop that echoed strangely off the cliffs. Gold! Not just flecks, but nuggets. Small at first, then larger. They worked like men possessed, the valley's oppressive atmosphere forgotten in the fever of discovery. Their sluice box, painstakingly constructed and hauled all this way, began to trap the heavy, yellow metal. Days turned into a frantic blur of shoveling gravel, washing sediment, and watching their canvas bags grow heavier. It was real. The legends were true, at least the golden part. Exhausted but elated, their containers literally brimming, they finally decided to head back, cash in, resupply, and return for more. But the Serpent River Valley doesn't give up its treasures easily. Loaded heavy, riding lower in the water, their boat caught a vicious cross-current on the downstream journey. Swiftwater Creek, seemingly placid moments before, turned into a raging beast. The boat bucked, slammed against a submerged rock, and splintered with a sickening crack. Suddenly, they were in the freezing water, fighting for their lives amidst the wreckage of their boat and the scattering of their hard-won fortune. The gold vanished instantly into the churning depths. By sheer grit and luck, all three brothers made it to shore, gasping, half-frozen, watching their supplies bob away or sink. They salvaged a rifle, some tools, a few provisions, and enough broken timbers to offer a sliver of hope. Devastated but alive, they faced a stark choice. Using salvaged wood and felling tough northern pines with their remaining axe, they somehow fashioned another crude vessel. Driven now not by greed but by grim necessity, they pulled and paddled back upstream to the site of their discovery, hoping against hope to recoup some of their losses. But the creek bed yielded nothing more. Not a speck. It was as if the gold had only ever been a mirage, a cruel trick played by the valley. Defeated, they finally turned their makeshift craft downstream again and limped out of the valley, returning home with nothing but bruises and a terrifying story. Back in the relative safety of their settlement, the experience solidified their differences. Silas and Jonas, haunted by the memory of the gold they'd held, could talk of nothing else but going back. "We know it's there, Caleb. We just hit a bad patch," Silas argued, eyes gleaming with renewed fervor. Jonas nodded eagerly. But Caleb shook his head, the chill of Swiftwater Creek seeming to have settled deep in his bones. "That place, it nearly took us," he said quietly. "It let us go once. I'm not tempting it again." No amount of arguing could sway him. And so, as the months passed and preparations for a second expedition began, it was without the eldest Thorn. In 1905, Silas and Jonas, their determination outweighing their fear, recruited a tough, reliable friend, Elias Vance, to take Caleb's place. Together, the three men set off once more into the brooding silence of the Serpent River Valley, leaving Caleb behind with a growing, gnawing unease. This time, the silence that followed their departure would stretch into years. And so Silas, Jonas, and Elias Vance vanished into the green maw of the Serpent River Valley. Back home, Caleb Thorne waited. And waited. The vibrant, short-lived northern summer faded into the melancholic colors of autumn, then surrendered to the iron grip of winter. Still no word. Caleb paced the floor of his small cabin, forcing down the unease that coiled in his gut. "They're fine," he told himself, told anyone who asked. Found a vein richer than sin, most likely. Decided to winter over, build themselves a proper cabin. Smart lads. He almost believed it, some days. They were Thorns, after all. Tough stock. And Elias Vance? Solid as an oak. Three experienced men. What could possibly go wrong? But winter thawed into a muddy spring, and another summer blazed across the vast northern expanse. The silence from the valley stretched, becoming thin, brittle. Caleb's reassurances started sounding hollow, even to his own ears. He'd find himself staring south, towards the distant, unseen valley, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He remembered his last argument with Silas, the younger man's eyes bright with gold fever, dismissing Caleb's warnings. "Don't be an old woman, Caleb. Fortune favors the bold." Jonas had just grinned, easily swept along. Had Caleb argued enough? Had his fear made him too cautious, sending them off without a steadying hand? The thoughts gnawed at him through the long, quiet nights. Another winter locked the land in ice. By the spring of 1908, 2 full years had passed since Silas, Jonas, and Elias had walked into the Serpent River Valley. The flimsy excuses Caleb had clung to crumbled into dust. Hope dwindled, replaced by a grim certainty. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. He couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. He had to go. He had to find them, or find out what fate had befallen them. Convincing others wasn't easy. The valley's reputation, coupled with the brothers' long absence, made men wary. But Caleb's quiet determination, the raw grief hardening in his eyes, swayed 4 others, tough, reliable men who knew the North and owed Caleb favors or felt the pull of loyalty. They gathered supplies, checked their rifles, and set out on the arduous trek Caleb now knew too well. The journey felt different this time. Every landmark Caleb recognized from his previous trip seemed tinged with menace. The struggle up Swiftwater Creek was just as brutal, the rapids just as unforgiving, but now the roar of the water sounded less like nature's power and more like a hungry snarl. He scanned the banks relentlessly, his eyes aching from the strain, searching for any sign, a broken oar, a discarded piece of equipment, the ashes of a campfire. Nothing. The valley remained silent, secretive, offering no clues. They reached the confluence where the Swiftwater met the broader, deeper South Serpent River. Here, the brothers had likely turned. Caleb's party followed, letting the current carry them downstream now, though progress was still slow, the river wide and powerful. Days passed. Still nothing. The vast, empty landscape began to weigh on the men. The initial grim determination gave way to a heavy fatigue, a sense of hopelessness. Caleb felt it too, a cold despair threatening to extinguish the last embers of hope. Where could they be? Then, the river took a sharp turn, funneling them towards towering cliffs that rose abruptly from the water's edge. They were entering the infamous gorge the old-timers sometimes called Shadow Canyon. The change was immediate, dramatic. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the depths, casting the river in perpetual twilight. The air grew colder, and a low wind moaned between the sheer rock faces, amplifying the sense of isolation. It felt like entering a tomb. Caves pockmarked the cliffs high above, dark, empty sockets watching their passage. Caleb felt a primal urge to turn back, an echo of the fear he'd felt on his first trip, but stronger now, colder. They were deep in the valley's throat. Onward they drifted, dwarfed by the immense geology, scanning the narrow, rocky shorelines on either side. There was scarcely room to beach a boat, the cliffs plunging almost directly into the dark water. 10 miles this canyon stretched, 10 miles of feeling trapped, exposed. Just as Caleb was thinking they'd have to push through the entire length before finding a place to make camp, just as the canyon seemed poised to spit them out into the wider valley beyond, one of his men pointed. A sharp intake of breath. There, tucked into a small stain of spindly pines on the left bank, almost hidden against the shadowed rock, was a flicker of weathered canvas. A tent. A tent. Hope surged through Caleb, a painful, fragile thing, warring instantly with the canyon's oppressive dread. He signaled frantically towards the shore, his voice tight. "Over there! Pull in!" The men needed no second urging, their paddles digging into the dark, swirling water, guiding the sturdy boat towards the narrow strip of land. It scraped against the gravel, and they were out in an instant, rifles held loosely but ready, eyes scanning the silent campsite. Too silent. The air hung heavy, still, carrying only the ceaseless murmur of the South Serpent River and the faint scent of damp earth and old wood smoke, and something else. Something metallic, cloying. Wrong. Silas. Jonas. Caleb called out, his voice hoarse, echoing flatly against the immense stone walls. No answer. Just the wind sighing high above. He pushed through the sparse pines towards the tent, the other men fanning out slightly behind him, their faces grim. And then he saw it. Lying sprawled on the frozen ground a few feet from the tent entrance. A human form. Or what was left of one. Time seemed to stutter, the roaring river fading to a distant hum in Caleb's ears. The figure lay face down, dressed in the familiar worn canvas and wool of a prospector. But where the head should have rested on the cold earth, there was nothing. Just a ragged, dark stump at the top of the neck. Bile rose in Caleb's throat. He stumbled forward, a low groan escaping his lips. The body, he thought it might be Silas, judging by the build, was horribly decomposed, ravaged by time and likely scavengers, yet strangely, patches of the clothing looked scorched, as if fire had lit at the fabric. One arm was outstretched, fingers stiffly curled just inches from a rifle propped against the base of a scrawny pine. Reaching for it? A final, desperate act? One of the search party swore softly, turning away. Another made the sign of the cross. Caleb barely registered them. His gaze was fixed on the horror before him, then dragged towards the tent flap, which hung partially open, revealing darkness within. Dread, cold and absolute, settled over him. He knew, somehow, before he even looked. Taking a shuddering breath, he moved towards the opening, pulling the canvas aside. The smell hit him first, thick and suffocating. And there, tangled in musty blankets, half in and half out of the small tent as if trying to escape, lay another body. Smaller build. Jonas. His heart seized. This figure, too, was headless. Badly decayed, like the first. Caleb choked back a sob, stumbling back, leaning against a tree for support, the world tilting around him. His brothers. Found. Like this. 2 years of desperate hope extinguished in a single, gruesome tableau. It took long moments for shock to recede enough for action. Grim-faced, Caleb and his men began the sickening task of searching the small, desolate camp. They looked everywhere for the missing heads, meeting some finality, some grisly piece of the puzzle, but found nothing. No trace. They searched for any sign of Elias Vance, the third man. Had he met the same fate? Had he fled? Or had he been responsible? There was no clue. He simply wasn't there. One of the men pointed to a nearby tree, where rough letters had been carved into the bark, now weathered but still legible. "We have found a fine prospect." The words mocked them from the past. A fine prospect indeed. But where was it? They searched the brothers' pockets, turned out the meager contents of the tent, bedrolls, a few rusted tools, empty tins. They even took turns panning the icy shallows of the creek near the camp. Nothing. Not a glint, not a flake. Whatever gold Silas and Jonas might have found, or thought they'd found, was gone. Vanished, like their heads, like Elias Vance. The silence of the canyon seemed to press in, amplifying the horror. What unspeakable violence had occurred here? What kind of beast, or human, could do such a thing? And why? Robbery felt too simple, too clean for this butchery. Caleb stared at the headless remains of his younger brothers, a cold rage beginning to burn through the fog of his grief. He wouldn't leave them here like this, but they couldn't move them now. Leaving the gruesome scene untouched for whatever authorities might eventually reach this godforsaken place, Caleb Thorne and his shaken party pushed their boat back into the current, leaving the silent, violated camp behind them. The journey out of Shadow Canyon was made in heavy silence, the weight of their discovery far heavier than any gold. Their first stop upon reaching civilization would be the outpost of the Northern Rangers. The valley's dark secret was about to bleed out into the wider world. News carried by Caleb Thorne and his grim-faced companions sent a shockwave through the small northern settlements and spurred the Northern Rangers into action. An official expedition, equipped for the harsh terrain, was mounted, heading back into the brooding depths of Shadow Canyon to investigate the horrific discovery. They documented the scene, collected the few remaining personal effects, and conducted as thorough a search as the remote, unforgiving landscape allowed after 2 years had exposed the site to the elements. Their eventual conclusion, delivered with bureaucratic detachment, felt anticlimactic, almost insulting, to those gripped by the horror of the tale. Silas and Jonas Thorne, along with Elias Vance, had most likely perished due to starvation or exposure, the report suggested. A common enough fate for ill-prepared prospectors in the vast northern expanse. As for the missing heads and the presumed scattering of Vance's remains, a partial skeleton found months later downstream was tentatively identified as his, though never confirmed. Animal scavenging, the rangers concluded. Wolves, bears, wolverines, plenty of creatures in the valley capable of such work on unwatched corpses. Case closed. An unfortunate tragedy. An accident of the wild. Caleb Thorne nearly exploded when he heard the official verdict. Starvation? Animals? He roared at the ranger captain delivering the news back in the settlement, his voice thick with grief and fury. My brothers weren't greenhorns. They knew how to survive out there. And animals don't leave bodies arranged like that, one reaching for his rifle. They don't scorch clothes. Someone did this to them. He clung to his belief that they'd been attacked, perhaps by natives resentful of intrusion, though the rangers found no evidence to support this. To Caleb, the neat, tidy explanation felt like a dismissal or refusal to acknowledge the true, violent horror he'd witnessed. The public, hungry for details as the story spread through newspapers and trapper routes, largely sided with Caleb's skepticism. The official explanation just didn't sit right. It couldn't account for the sheer strangeness of it all, the decapitations, the missing gold, the vanished partner. Speculation ran rampant, dividing folks into passionate camps. One popular theory painted Elias Vance as the villain. Overcome by greed, he'd murdered his partners, possibly decapitating them to hinder identification or add a layer of terror, made off with their gold, and staged his own disappearance. But could one man overpower two hardy brothers? And what about the partial skeleton found later? Others believed all 3 men were victims of a brutal attack. Rival prospectors? A crazed hermit hiding in the valley's depths? Or, whispered others, leaning closer over bar tops, maybe those old native legends weren't just stories. Maybe something inhuman stalked that canyon, something ancient and hostile. The white phantoms? The shadow stalkers? Regardless of which theory one favored, the gruesome, undeniable fact of the headless bodies seized the public imagination. The chilling image became inextricably linked with the location. Shadow Canyon, already imposing and unnerving, acquired a new, more visceral name, born from the collective horror, Headless Valley. The name stuck, spreading like ice across a pond, forever branding that stretch of the Serpent River Valley with the mark of its most infamous mystery. And with the name came fear. A deep, abiding fear. Prospectors, a breed not easily deterred, began to give Headless Valley a wide berth. The knowledge that gold lay somewhere within its shadowed depths wasn't enough to overcome the terror inspired by the fate of the Thorne brothers. For years, the valley remained largely shunned, its silence deeper, its reputation darker than ever before. Yet, the lure of gold, however tarnished by blood and mystery, has a persistent power, a siren call waiting for the next soul brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to ignore the deadly warnings. Fear held sway for years, the name Headless Valley a chilling deterrent painted across the mental maps of the North. Prospectors spoke of it in hushed tones, if they spoke of it at all. The memory of the Thorne brothers, headless and ravaged in that lonely canyon, was a powerful antidote to gold fever. For a time. But gold fever is a persistent ailment, resistant to reason and even terror. Eventually, someone decided the potential reward outweighed the horrific risk. 8 years after the Thornes' fate shocked the settlements, in 1913, a man named Silas Croft decided he wouldn't be scared off by ghost stories. Croft was apparently a man brimming with confidence, perhaps bordering on arrogance. He'd heard the tales, sure. Who hadn't? But he likely dismissed them as exaggerations, the product of fear and isolation. He was smarter, tougher, luckier than the Thornes. He wouldn't make their mistakes, All alone, he undertook the arduous journey into the Serpent River Valley, pointedly bypassing the now infamous Headless Valley section of the South Serpent River. He pushed his way further up the tributary, Swiftwater Creek, finding a promising spot some 70 miles upstream from where the brothers had met their end. Distance, he probably figured, meant safety. He even built himself a small, one-room cabin, a solid structure meant to see him through the winter. He wasn't just passing through, he was staking his claim. And initially, his confidence seemed justified. He set up his sluices, went to work, and according to the messages he managed to get out to his waiting partners before winter truly clamped down, he hit pay dirt. Big time. Made it rich. The messages proclaimed, filled with triumph. Rolling in it. Meet me come summer, plenty more for all of us. His partners, miles away in the relative safety of civilization, celebrated his success, eagerly anticipating the spring thaw and the rendezvous that would make them all wealthy men. Spring came, painting the expanse with fleeting greenery. Summer followed. Croft's partners made their way to the agreed-upon meeting spot just outside the valley's reach. They waited. And waited. Days turned into a week. No sign of Silas Croft. Unease began to curdle their excitement. Croft was reliable, if boastful. He wouldn't just fail to show. Something was wrong. Steeling themselves, they ventured into the valley, following Croft's directions up Swiftwater Creek towards the area he'd described. They found his claim, all right. Or what was left of it. The sturdy cabin Croft had built with such confidence was now a smoking heap of charred logs and ash. It had been utterly destroyed by fire. And lying beside the blackened ruins, sprawled awkwardly on the scorched earth, was another horror. The burned remains of a human body. Headless. Though badly damaged by the fire and decay, personal effects confirmed the unthinkable. It was Silas Croft. Once again, the Northern Rangers were called. Once again, they investigated the grim scene in the remote wilderness. And once again, their conclusion felt maddeningly inadequate. What killed Croft? Impossible to determine definitively due to the fire and decomposition. The missing head? Animals, surely. The fire? An accident, perhaps involving the stovepipe, or a stray ember. They found no evidence connecting Croft's death to the Thorne brothers' fate years earlier and miles downstream, despite the chilling similarities, the decapitation, the possible involvement of fire, the location within the greater Serpent River Valley system. Croft's skull was never found. And the vast riches he'd claimed to possess? Vanished. Not a speck of gold remained at the site. The public wasn't buying the official story this time either. 2 incidents. Headless victims. It was too much coincidence. Whispers of a killer, human or otherwise, stalking the valley grew louder. 7 more years passed. The chilling tales endured, becoming ingrained northern folklore. Yet, the lure of gold persisted. In 1921, another pair of prospectors, John O'Brien, maybe let's call him Finn Martell for our telling, and his partner decided to tempt fate. They were cautious, setting up camp near the dreaded Headless Valley but not directly in the most infamous stretch where the thorns were found. They worked the gravel bars, found some color, enough to keep hope alive. Things seemed normal. For a while. Then, one morning, Martell told his partner he was heading out along the river to check their scattered trap lines, expecting to be back in 8 or 9 days. He vanished into the woods. His partner waited. 8 days passed. 9. 10. Martell didn't return. Anxiety mounting, the partners sought out another prospector camped nearby, and together, they began searching upstream along the river, following Martell's likely path. They found him. And the scene was perhaps even more bizarre, more unsettling in its own way, than the gruesome discoveries that preceded it. Martell was sitting by the dead ashes of a campfire. Frozen solid. But he wasn't slumped over in agony or huddled against the cold. He sat upright, strangely serene, hands resting on his knees, holding a book of matches loosely in one hand. His face bore no trace of fear or pain, Witnesses later said it looked as if he'd been flash frozen, instantly turned to ice while casually enjoying the warmth of his fire. As if death had come not as a struggle, but as an instantaneous, silent transformation. The authorities, when summoned, acknowledged the strangeness of the posture but ultimately ruled it death by exposure. No signs of foul play. Yet, the image lingered, Finn Martel, frozen in a moment of impossible peace, killed by a cold that seemed to defy the very nature of dying. Two more strange deaths, years apart, one violent and bloody, the other eerily still, yet both utterly baffling. The valley seemed to be claiming victims in varied, unpredictable, and terrifying ways. And its grim tally was far from complete. Indeed, the valley's grim tally was far from complete, its methods seemingly shifting, becoming even more bizarre, perhaps even mocking the attempts to understand its lethal nature. Where Croft met a gruesome, violent end and Martel a strangely silent one, the next incidents would veer into territory bordering on the surreal and the deeply suspicious. The Serpent River Valley wasn't just killing people, it seemed to be playing with them, erasing them, leaving behind questions that scraped at the edges of sanity. Take the case of Clara Dunn, in 1926. Unlike the solitary prospectors before her, Clara was part of a larger hunting party, friends or family seeking game and adventure, bold enough or perhaps naive enough to make camp right along Swiftwater Creek, squarely within the boundaries of what was now universally known as Headless Valley. Maybe there was safety in numbers, they thought. Maybe the presence of a woman, young and vibrant, perhaps Clara was there with her new husband, eager for a taste of the northern wild he loved, would somehow soften the valley's harsh countenance. They spent an evening around the crackling fire, sharing stories, the laughter echoing a little too loudly in the vast silence, perhaps a subconscious effort to ward off the ever-present sense of being watched. Eventually, they retired to their individual tents, the sounds of the river a lulling counterpoint to the crackle of the dying embers. The next morning, Clara Dunn was gone. Simply, gone. Her husband, or father, the details blur with time and retelling, raised the alarm. Frantic searching revealed nothing. Her tent was empty, her bedroll undisturbed save for the impression where she had slept. There were no tracks leading away, the ground near the tents was soft enough to take prints, but only those of the existing party members were found. No sound had been heard overnight, no struggle, no cry for help. It was as if she had dissolved into the morning mist rising from the river. The hunting party spent the entire day combing the area, their calls growing hoarse, their initial panic slowly freezing into dread. They found no sign. Not a torn piece of clothing, not a footprint further afield, nothing. Reluctantly, defeated, they eventually left the valley to report the inexplicable disappearance. Extensive searches followed, involving rangers and experienced trackers. They found nothing. Clara Dunn had been utterly erased. Months later, a strange postscript emerged. An old, reclusive trapper the locals called Old Man Hemlock, who lived a solitary life trapping along the valley's less-traveled tributaries, happened to overhear talk in a distant settlement about the missing woman from the hunting party. Hemlock, usually tight-lipped, sought out the authorities, visibly agitated. He explained that he'd been camped several miles downriver from the hunting party's site around the time Clara vanished, close enough to sometimes hear their distant voices on the wind. One night, he told the rangers, he was woken by an unusual sound, rocks clattering, skittering down the steep cliff face on the opposite side of the river. Curious, he sat up in his lean-to. The moon was bright enough to cast sharp shadows. He scanned the cliffs. Nothing at first. Then, the sound again, further up. And he saw her. 100 yards away, maybe more, illuminated in patches by the moonlight filtering through the sparse pines, was a figure scrambling frantically up the near-vertical rock face. It was, he swore, a naked white woman. She moved with terrifying speed and agility, sometimes on all fours like an animal, dislodging small stones that tumbled into the dark water below. As she reached a precarious ledge, she stopped, turned, and looked back towards the river, towards where Hemlock watched, hidden. He saw her face clearly in the moonlight. And it terrified him. It wasn't human, he stammered to the rangers. Not exactly. Her eyes glowed with a feral light, her expression twisted into something utterly mad, possessed. He felt a wave of primal fear wash over him, instinctively ducking back into the shadows, making no attempt to call out or follow. It wasn't just a woman in distress, it was something wrong. He stayed hidden until dawn, the image burned into his mind. He later provided a description that matched Clara Dunn. Universally, it's believed the figure Hemlock saw that night was Clara. But what had happened to her? What could drive a person to such a state, scaling cliffs naked in the dead of night? The authorities, faced with a months-old eyewitness account of something so bizarre, logged the report but undertook no further action. Clara was presumed dead, another ghost claimed by the valley's insatiable appetite for mystery. 5 years later, in 1931, the valley's deadly attention turned again. Alistair Finch, another hopeful prospector undeterred by the ever-lengthening list of victims and strange occurrences, ventured into Headless Valley. Perhaps he thought he was smarter, better prepared. He found his spot off Swiftwater Creek, built himself a cabin, a small, solid defense against the wilderness, and presumably began his search for gold. He wasn't there long. Shortly after his arrival, his cabin was discovered engulfed in flames. When the fire finally burned itself out, Finch's remains were found inside the ashes. But this time, there was a crucial, disturbing difference. Unlike Croft, whose body was badly burned and headless, Finch's skeleton was reportedly largely intact. He hadn't been decapitated. Investigators examining the charred remnants, however, noted something deeply suspicious. The fire appeared to have originated high up, likely on the roof or in the upper structure, possibly from the stovepipe as the official report would eventually suggest. Given this, Finch should have had ample time to notice the smoke, the heat, the flames, and escape through the cabin door or window. Yet, he hadn't. He died inside. The implication was immediate and chilling. Was Alistair Finch already dead, or at least incapacitated, before the fire even started? Had someone killed him and then torched the cabin to cover their tracks? The official verdict was, predictably, accidental death due to fire. But too many questions remained. Too many inconsistencies. The public, weary of convenient explanations, largely dismissed it. Decapitations, flash freezings, impossible vanishings, suspicious fires, the valley wasn't just haunted, it felt actively malevolent, employing a terrifyingly diverse repertoire. And the pattern of death, far from ending, seemed only to be deepening, twisting into ever more inexplicable forms. The valley's chilling repertoire continued to diversify, its darkness manifesting in vanishings, suspicious fires, and horrors both bizarre and brutally direct. It seemed almost as if some malevolent intelligence was experimenting, honing its methods. The mid-1930s and 1940s would see the pattern not only continue but culminate in incidents that brought the terror full circle, echoing the earliest gruesome discoveries and lending terrifying weight to ancient fears. In 1936, the valley claimed two more. Ben Carter and Isaac Shaw, perhaps believing there was safety in partnership against the valley's known hazards, ventured into Headless Valley together. They were experienced men, by all accounts, equipped for a long stay, hoping their combined vigilance could overcome whatever threat lurked there. They set up their camp, presumably began prospecting, and then, silence. Predictably, when they failed to emerge after a reasonable time, a search was organized. The party located their campsite without too much difficulty, and found their cabin burned to the ground. A sickeningly familiar sight by now. But as they sifted through the ashes and debris, a new, horrifying layer of mystery presented itself. Unlike Alistair Finch, whose skeleton had been found within the charred ruins of his cabin, there was no sign of Carter or Shaw. None whatsoever. No bones, no scorched remains, nothing to indicate they had perished in the fire. They were simply gone. Vanished as completely as Clara Dunn had years earlier, but this time, their shelter had been incinerated after their disappearance. Or perhaps during. Had they been dragged out before the fire? Or had they fled some other terror only for their empty cabin to be mysteriously torched? The questions piled up, each more disturbing than the last. The valley wasn't just killing, It was erasing, leaving behind scorched earth and maddeningly blank spaces where answers should be. 9 years later, in the autumn of 1945, the darkness in Headless Valley seemed to indulge in a particularly cruel piece of historical symmetry. A prospector named Marcus Thorne entered the valley. The name itself sent a shiver through the settlements. Was he related to the original brothers whose headless fate had christened this cursed place? Accounts suggest he was, perhaps a distant nephew or cousin, drawn back by some potent mix of family legacy, morbid curiosity, and the ever-present lure of gold. Maybe he felt a need to confront the valley that had claimed his kin, or perhaps, with the hubris of a later generation, he believed he could succeed where they had failed so catastrophically. He went in alone, following the well-worn path of hope and dread along Swiftwater Creek. Like so many before him, Marcus Thorne failed to keep his rendezvous with partners waiting outside the valley. And like Caleb Thorne nearly 4 decades earlier, his partners mounted a search. They found him. Not far from the infamous canyon, lying near the banks of Swiftwater Creek. He was inside his bedroll, seemingly asleep. Except he wasn't. Marcus Thorne was dead. Decapitated. His head, like those of his long-dead relatives, was nowhere to be found. The sheer, brutal repetition was staggering. It felt less like a random act of violence or animal predation and more like a deliberate, mocking echo, a reminder from the valley that its gruesome signature remained unchanged. The official investigation, when it inevitably occurred, offered the same tired explanation. The victim likely died of natural causes, exposure, starvation, and animals later removed the head. By this point, virtually no one believed it. The blatant similarity to the original Thorne case, the specific horror of the decapitation, it screamed foul play, or something worse. The authorities, it seemed to many, were either utterly incompetent or engaged in a bizarre, unspoken conspiracy of silence, refusing to acknowledge the monstrous reality of Headless Valley. The final chilling chapter in this mid-century reign of terror came just 1 year later, in 1946. Another miner, Gideon Hayes, drawn by the persistent whispers of gold that even decades of death couldn't entirely silence, went into Headless Valley. He, too, vanished without a trace. A search party was dispatched, one of the last major efforts of its kind for many years. They spent days scouring the unforgiving terrain around Swiftwater Creek, finding nothing, the valley guarding its secrets as jealously as ever. On one of their last nights in the valley, camped near the river under a nervous moon, they received unexpected visitors. A small group of local deer hunters emerged silently from the trees. They looked frightened. They approached the search party's fire hesitantly, their eyes darting towards the surrounding darkness. Their warning was brief, urgent, delivered in low tones that barely carried over the river's murmur. "You should not be here tonight," one of the elders supposedly cautioned. "There are figures walking. White figures. Down near the water, among the trees. They are watching." The dean spoke of these beings with palpable fear, implying they were something unnatural, dangerous. Were these the white phantoms of ancient legend? Before the stunned search party could ask more, the hunters melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with terror. The rest of that night was torture for the search party. Sleep was impossible. Where the previous nights had been filled only with the normal sounds of the wilderness, this night was different. They began to hear things. Distant howls that didn't sound like any wolf they knew, longer, more mournful, somehow intelligent. Strange, high-pitched wailing sounds seemed to drift from the cliffs, sometimes sounding like screams of agony, sometimes like mocking laughter. The sounds came from all directions, shifting, seeming to circle the small camp, pressing in on them. It felt, the men later recounted, deeply intentional, as if something out there was deliberately trying to terrify them, to drive them away. They huddled closer to the fire, rifles clutched tight, eyes straining into the oppressive darkness, imagining pale shapes moving just beyond the firelight. They felt intensely, horribly unwelcome, as if the valley itself was screaming at them to leave. They needed no further encouragement. At the first hint of dawn, they broke camp with frantic haste and fled the valley, abandoning the search for Gideon Hayes, who was never seen again. The leader of that final, terrified search party would later speak of the profound sense of wrongness that permeated the entire valley, a feeling of deep-seated malevolence he could never shake. And the sounds they heard that night? He claimed they haunted his dreams for the rest of his life. After that, the steady stream of mysterious deaths and disappearances in Headless Valley finally began to slow, not perhaps because the menace had departed, but because fewer and fewer souls dared to enter its deadly embrace. And then, relative quiet. After the palpable terror experienced by Gideon Hayes' search party, after the chilling warnings and the night of unseen horrors, the steady drumbeat of disappearances and violent deaths within the Serpent River Valley seemed to fade after the mid-1940s. The relentless chronicle of tragedy paused. Did the horror finally recede, satiated after decades of claiming victims? Or did people simply learn, finally, brutally, to stay away from places that bleed darkness? Perhaps word had spread far and wide enough, the name Headless Valley now less a morbid curiosity and more a stark, unambiguous warning. Stay out. Stay alive. Whatever the reason, the latter half of the 20th century saw far fewer documented strange incidents emanating from the valley's depths. But the silence doesn't erase the history. It doesn't answer the questions that still echo through those imposing canyons. For over 40 years, the valley had been a stage for a horrifying pageant of death and disappearance. Dozens of people, prospectors, hunters, natives, men and women, erased or left behind in pieces. The gruesome signature of decapitation, repeated with chilling precision. Bodies burned beyond recognition in cabins that shouldn't have caught fire. Men frozen solid in postures defying natural death. People vanishing into thin air, leaving behind only bewildered companions and, in one case, a terrifying account of naked madness on a moonlit cliff. Add to that the unsettling background radiation of ancient legends, the vanished denied tribe, the spectral white phantoms, the predatory shadow stalkers, and the puzzle becomes almost overwhelming. What truly stalked Headless Valley during those blood-soaked decades? Was it merely human evil, amplified by isolation and the corrosive lure of gold? Could Elias Vance, or some other unknown killer, have been responsible for the Thorne brothers, perhaps setting a precedent for violence? Did rival prospectors turn on each other in the desperate, lonely search for fortune? These explanations feel thin, unable to stretch across the sheer variety and strangeness of all the incidents. Could it have been something else? Were the native legends more than just folklore? Did some ancient entity or spectral force guard the valley, punishing intruders with methods both brutal and bizarre? Or was it the land itself, a concept dismissed by rational minds, yet one that resonates with the pervasive sense of unease reported by so many who ventured there, the genius loci, actively hostile, possessing a malevolent awareness? The truth, frustratingly, remains buried, perhaps as deep and inaccessible as the valley's hidden gold veins. In more recent times, vast swathes of this wilderness, including the Serpent River Valley, were officially designated as the Serpent River National Preserve, an act intended to protect its stunning natural beauty and unique ecosystems for future generations. Roads remain non-existent, access still primarily limited to plane or boat. It remains wild, remote, largely untraveled. Yet, even under the mantle of official protection, the whispers persist. And significantly, in recent years, large sections of the preserve, including areas directly encompassing or bordering the infamous Headless Valley and the treacherous stretches of Swiftwater Creek, have been subject to extended closures by park authorities. The official reasons often cite the need to protect sensitive wildlife habitats or allow for ecological recovery. Sensible justifications, on the surface. But talk to the old-timers in the nearby settlements, listen to the chatter around wood stoves on long winter nights, and you'll hear different theories. Are they really closing off thousands of square miles just for the caribou? Or are they trying to keep people out? Are they trying, perhaps, to prevent anyone from stumbling too close to whatever secrets the valley still holds? Are they trying to stop the cycle from beginning again? Is there something within those protected boundaries that the authorities know about, or suspect, but cannot control or explain? The closures, whatever their true purpose, only add another layer to the enduring enigma. Today, the Serpent River Valley, or Headless Valley, remains a place of profound mystery. Its staggering beauty is forever intertwined with its dark and bloody history. The dozens of souls lost within its embrace remain largely unaccounted for, their fates fueling speculation and campfire stories. Despite investigations, despite the passage of time, despite its status as a protected natural area, the valley holds its secrets tight. It stands as a chilling reminder that there are still places on this earth beyond our full understanding, corners where the veil between the known and the terrifyingly unknown is perilously thin, and where the ancient, wild darkness still waits,